It's time to talk about one of the most important parts of fantasy football, which of course is the waiver wire. And there's a lot of reasons that you could be using the waiver wire at this point of the season so early on. And one of them is that bad news has struck. And obviously, we've got massively bad news this week, specifically with J.K. Dobbins. It is official. He tore his Achilles and he is going to miss the rest of the season. Now, the other reason you could be using it is because guys are just evolving in their new roles or just becoming breakout players entirely. Regardless of the reason that you need to go to the waiver wire, we need to go over the top 7 must-add waiver wire targets on your waiver wire before week 2 fantasy football. So we're going to go ahead and get started, obviously, with the elephant in the room, which is the 2 Ravens running backs. Justice Hill and Gus Edwards are both on here. Justice Hill is 0.3% rostered, less than 1% rostered on ESPN leagues, and Gus Edwards is just over 20% rostered on ESPN leagues as well. So both of these guys are widely available on your waiver wire, most likely on any given platform right here. So obviously, like I said, it's the elephant in the room. J.K. Dobbins is done. And honestly, this one is really disheartening for me personally because J.K. Dobbins is a guy I just kept getting higher and higher on as the offseason went on. And I was telling you guys, my audience, to draft J.K. Dobbins. So obviously you can't predict these types of injuries. This is just massively unfortunate. And the reality is neither of these guys are as good as J.K. Dobbins is, right? Like, we all acknowledge that Justice Hill and Gus Edwards, neither of them are going to be as good players as J.K. Dobbins is. But they're both on here because they both were equally as relevant in that week 1 game on Sunday versus the Houston Texans. They both had 8 carries in that game. Now, I watched that game live, and what I can tell you about that particular game and how those carries broke down is that Justice Hill, he was handling the majority of the goal line work. That's why he came away with 2 touchdowns while Gus Edwards had 0 touchdowns. Gus Edwards, he was mainly handling carries between the 20s. So he was handling the majority of the carries, and he also averaged 4 yards per carry, because the reality is the reason that they're 2 on there is not only because they are starting running backs, but because they are on good offenses with a top 5 to 7 offensive line in the NFL. That's the reason that they're on there, is because the offensive line and their situations are very, very good. Both of these guys, clearly based on Sunday, they're both going to have roles in this offense. Now, if I had to choose one of them, I'm leaning towards Gus Edwards because I think the volume will be on his side. And who knows how often Justice Hill is going to get 2 touchdowns in a game, right? Like, that's probably not always going to happen. So I would rather lean on the side of volume play rather than banking on the touchdown from Justice Hill. But if Gus Edwards, you can't get him, you're probably going to have to get Justice Hill if you want to have some piece of this backfield. And I think he's a decent consolation prize. Again, this is really just honestly an unfortunate situation that I wish we didn't have to talk about on this particular Monday before week 2 fantasy football. But it is our reality, and we need to discuss realities here. So obviously, moving down here to number 3, I've got Josh Reynolds of the Detroit Lions here. Less than 1% rostered on ESPN leagues as well. Probably not rostered in your league either. Now, there was obviously a lot of things going on Thursday night in that Lions-Chiefs matchup. But one of the things that really stood out to me the most was Josh Reynolds. Josh Reynolds was pretty impressive and also important to this offense. He had 7 targets in that game and 80 yards receiving. Listen, I know that's not some superstar stat line or anything like that, but 10 points in a half PPR league, that's good enough to flex in particular weeks. He looks like the clear wide receiver 2 in this Detroit Lions offense. Now, obviously, some people are going to say this is probably going to change once Jameson Williams comes back. And you know what? That very well could be the case. Entirely could be the case. Jameson Williams was a top 15 pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. This team is dying to get him involved in this offense. But honestly, here's the thing about the Lions offense. I actually think that we need to start adjusting our expectations of the Detroit Lions offense. This is a real top offense in this league. They're going to be very, very good. They have a top 3 offensive line. They've got a top playmaking wide receiver in Amon-Ra St. Brown. He is helping out guys like Josh Reynolds. He will help out guys like Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams helps out a guy like Josh Reynolds. Jahmyr Gibbs and their running situation. This is a very, very good offense as a whole right here. So I don't see it as crazy at all to suggest that Josh Reynolds absolutely could have some legitimate weeks as a flex option, not only for this upcoming week, but moving forward for the next coming weeks as well. So dropping down to our next guy here, I've got Zay Jones of the Jacksonville Jaguars, rostered in about 30% of ESPN leagues at this current moment in time. So honestly, it looks like we might be doing the same song and dance as we did last year with Zay Jones. He could very well be a waiver wire stud again this season in 2023. And this was really, really shocking to me. When I saw what he did on Sunday, it was way more involvement than I thought there was going to be. 7 targets in that game. Again, another touchdown. He did this kind of stuff frequently last year. 14 fantasy points in half PPR. Christian Kirk, honestly, the guy I've been hyped about all offseason, he looks like the wide receiver 3 in this offense. That's the craziest part to me. I may have been dead wrong about most of the Jacksonville Jaguars players, aside from Travis Etienne, who was also very good this weekend as well, but we won't discuss that in this particular video so much because we're talking about waiver wires right here. Because Zay Flowers legitimately does have chances to be a waiver wire type of hero again. This is a guy who is in a top 5 offense in the NFL. They looked tremendous on Sunday against the Indianapolis Colts, who, by the way, they struggled with more than I thought they would. But again, they persevered and they got the job done because they've got a stud at quarterback. They've got stud playmakers. Calvin Ridley looked way better than I thought he would in week 1. So this team really does have a lot of playmakers, and I think that Zay Jones is going to be a key contributor in some weeks. I'm not going to say that I would say put him in your flex spot. Like, just put him in there and forget about it. Like, I think it's going to be a matchup basis, and I think sometimes it could be hard to predict these types of weeks for Zay Jones, but I'd rather you take him on your bench rather than letting an opponent take him and steal it and use it against you in a week where you need to win that game in particular right here. So I'm going to be putting claims in on this dude this week. I advise you to do the same because he's definitely got a very high ceiling as a boomer bust type of guy in a top 5 offense in the NFL right now. So moving down to number 5, I've got Calvin Austin of the Pittsburgh Steelers here. And this guy, again, less than 1% rostered in ESPN leagues. The chances that Calvin Austin is on someone's roster in your particular league, very, very slim to none right here. So, real quick before we get into Calvin Austin, specifically the player, aside from the New York Giants, the Pittsburgh Steelers had the most embarrassing debut of the 2023 season. Their performance was absolutely, like, they should be ashamed of themselves for how bad they were. I mean, Pickett looked like a rookie still, and the defense was absolutely atrocious. But what I saw amidst watching that game live, the very interesting piece I came away for fantasy football is that Calvin Austin was way more involved than I thought he would be before the game started. He had 6 targets, 6 catches for 37 yards, 6.7 fantasy points. Obviously, that's not a great week, right? That's kind of like a Jahan Dotson stat line of this particular week right here. So it's not great, it's not good, but it's not bad either. You know what I mean? Like, it's an interesting situation because he led the team in receptions this week, and this was even before Deontay Johnson went down. But obviously, the even more important piece to this situation is that Deontay Johnson went down with the hamstring injury. There's a decent chance that Deontay Johnson misses the next 2 weeks or so. That would not surprise me at all. And if that is the case, Calvin Austin is probably going to be the one who benefits the most from this, aside from George Pickens, who is obviously not on waiver wires. But the guy who could benefit from this is Calvin Austin, because before Deontay went down, Calvin Austin was seeing a lot of involvement in this offense. Calvin Austin, he was a 4th-round rookie for them in 2022 out of the University of Memphis. He's an explosive player. This guy legitimately has chances to have upside if the Pittsburgh Steelers can at least improve to some degree offensively in the rest of 2023. All we really need is for them to look functional and for Kenny Pickett to actually throw some functional passes moving forward for Calvin Ridley to see any kind of upside. But I do think the upside play is worth throwing on your bench right here. So moving down to number 6, I've got Kenneth Gainwell of the Philadelphia Eagles right here. This is probably the most important ad of the week. He's rostered in about 21.7% of ESPN leagues right now. I think this is the most important ad of the week, even more important than the Baltimore running backs right here in particular. And I'll tell you why. So over the offseason, we've all had our own takes. I think a lot of us have differed about who the Philadelphia Eagles running back one is going to be in this offense. A lot of people said DeAndre Swift. A lot of people were like, DeAndre Swift's the most talented. It makes the most sense here. I was on the Rashaad Penny team. I was leading the charge saying that Rashaad Penny is a great steal in fantasy football drafts. Here's the reality that we just saw on Sunday. DeAndre Swift had 2 touches on Sunday, and Rashaad Penny was a healthy scratch. We were all wrong. All of us were wrong on this one collectively, because what we need to remember here is that there were reports out there to the public that Kenneth Gainwell was actually going to be the one to lead this backfield in Philadelphia this season. Honestly, I owe you guys an apology. I really, really do, because I saw those reports and I just ignored them. I thought that Rashaad Penny was such a great value, and I thought that he was going to be the better ball carrier, and I thought that Swift had a better shot to do it than Kenneth Gainwell. But what we saw on Sunday, it wasn't even freaking close. Kenneth Gainwell had 18 touches, and there were only 22 total running back touches in this game. So that means that Kenneth Walker saw 18 of the 22, and the rest of those 4 were carried out by Boston Scott and DeAndre Swift. It wasn't even close who the lead back is in this particular backfield. And honestly, the reality with this matchup in particular, New England was a tough matchup. Obviously, Philadelphia ended up winning. They have such a great offense that they were able to get the job done, but they're not going to face defenses as tough as the New England Patriots in the future. And Philadelphia also has the #1 offensive line in 2023. And to show you how much of an easier situation they've got this week, they're taking on the Minnesota Vikings defense in week 2 on Thursday night. I expect this to be a much better matchup for a guy like Kenneth Gainwell right here. So honestly, if you wanted to flex him this week, he's definitely going to be in consideration for me in the leagues that I have him in redraft this week. Because the reality is, and the bottom line, is that you want a running back on this team with this great of an offensive line and this great of an offensive situation right here. Kenneth Gainwell is my most important pickup this week. Rasheed Rice is going to round out my top 7 right here of the Kansas City Chiefs, rostered in just under 10% of ESPN leagues this week. So amidst all the awful wide receiver play that we saw against the Lions on Thursday night for the Kansas City Chiefs, the one guy who was the least bad, I mean, I can't even say that Rasheed Rice was great because he wasn't. I think he had like 1 or 2 drops in that game as well. But the least bad one was Rasheed Rice. Rasheed Rice, 5 targets, 3 receptions, ended up getting a touchdown catch, 10.4 fantasy points in half PPR. Not a bad week. That's a legitimate flex-worthy week. But the key here, like I said, is least bad. He was the least bad one right here. Because even when Travis Kelce does come back, and I don't know if it's going to be this week, I know that Kansas City has optimism it will be in week 2, but we don't know. But when he does come back, this team needs an answer at their wide receiver position. And I'll tell you who it's not. It's not going to be Kadarius Toney. It's not going to be Sky Moore. And Rice looked the best out of all of them, aside from maybe Marquez Valdes-Scantling in this offense and Justin Watson in the particular situations that he was in on Thursday night. But Rasheed Rice definitely has a decent amount of upside because he's in a great offense and because a lot of their wide receivers just look bad. So Rasheed Rice in this situation, I'll take the upside all day being on the best offense in football. I think that Rasheed Rice does have some better days ahead of him. So let me know what you think of this list right here and who you are targeting on your waiver wire and also who you are dropping for these guys. And if you want to see the top trade targets that are buy low guys before week 2 fantasy football, click on this video right here.